10.5 foot stele covered with an inscription on both sides. So on this side is the most famous name found in this entire inscription, which is right down here.
Under the sun-baked hills east of the Dead Sea, where the wind still whips through ruined cities and forgotten roads, a stone waited silent. For almost 3,000 years, it lay undetected, bearing the voice of a king who never dreamed of the future he would confront. He was no prophet, no priest of Israel. He was a pagan king, devoted to a foreign god, hostile toward Israel, and proud of his victories. Yet when his words finally surfaced, they did something no sermon ever has. They verified names, events, and a God that secular narratives say should not have existed yet. This stone does not whisper, it brags. In its bragging, it discloses more truth than its author ever intended.
It is called the Moabite stone, or the Mesha stela. A stela is an upright stone slab or pillar, usually bearing an inscription, and used to serve as a monument or marker.
But what could a long-forgotten pagan king reveal about God's existence? Truths history insists should never have surfaced. The land of Moab and the world of kings. Moab stood atop a high plateau, east of the Jordan River, in the region that nowadays is known as Jordan. The high altitude of this area gives Moab a natural deterrent from attack, as well as an enormous strategic advantage over an enemy with a much lower elevation. Due to the continual fighting and bloodshed throughout this territory in the Iron Age, 1200 BCE to 600 BCE, it also has an extremely volatile political environment. The large amounts of iron ore available in this area, coupled with the importance of trade routes connecting the Mediterranean Sea with the Arabian interior, were enough motivation for numerous battles to occur. After Solomon's death, Moab was in constant conflict with Israel due to the fact that Israel had become a divided kingdom between Israel to the north and Judah to the south. The Moabites worshipped Chemosh, who was considered to be their national god, giving them success in warfare and maintaining an exclusive loyalty to him. Chemosh was worshipped through extravagant ceremonial worship performed at temples, through the practice of sacrifice, and during pilgrimage festivals that served to define the Moabites' nationality and, therefore, their political unity as well. Archaeological discoveries from sites such as Dibon and Khirbet Balu'ah have uncovered temples and other items associated with Chemosh. The Israelites cared for the worship of God, Yahweh, by constructing a central temple in Jerusalem. Yahweh worship was widespread throughout the countryside, both by means of local sanctuaries and high places. To the contrary, these gods were not abstract conceptions. They were considered active agents of war, directly intervening in human affairs to save their chosen peoples. Defeat indicated the withdrawal of divine favor, perhaps because of ritual impurity or broken covenants, whereas victory proved divine approval and vindication of religious practice. Such a worldview made every military encounter a theological one, in which earthly armies clashed under the banner of heavenly powers. Every campaign was preceded by elaborate rituals, prophetic consultations, and public expressions of religious piety aimed at securing divine favor. This deeply religious understanding of international relations introduces one of the most consequential inscriptions ever to be discovered, the Mesha Stele, which would dramatically illuminate this ancient worldview and provide crucial historical evidence of the complex relationship these ancient kingdoms had. But what dark secrets did this ancient stone conceal? Secrets powerful enough to spark war between kingdoms centuries ago. The stone that triggered bloodshed. In 1868, near the historic site of the old town of Dera, German missionary Frederick Klein investigated the excavation of a massive basalt monolith inscribed with compact Moabite writing. Klein, who was associated with the Church Missionary Society and was well-versed in Arabic, was busy journaling his observations in the region as an archaeology documentarian when the discovery was brought to his notice by his local Bedouin guides. The inscribed stone was close to 4 feet tall and inscribed with 34 lines of ancient text written in Moabite, a Canaanite language that is closely related to Hebrew. The inscribed text listed various victories of King Mesha of Moab over the people of Israel and has proved to be an extremely valuable historic context, corroborating a text from chapter 2 of Kings in the Bible. The significance of this artifact became clear for more than just historians, but for a community as well. Today, this reconstructed stele has been housed in the Louvre Museum in Paris, where it has been a rich source of information regarding the history, political, and linguistic aspects of ancient Near Eastern civilization. The information provided in the inscription, which highlights the military exploits and architectural undertakings, as well as the devotion of Mesha to his god, Chemosh, the Moabite god, provides a refreshing sidelight from a biblical perspective. The story of the removal, destruction, and eventual preservation of this stone represents a striking anachronism reflecting the delicate balance of archaeology, culture, and colonialism which had characterized antiquity in the latter part of the 19th century.
So this inscription dates to the 9th century BC. Stele from the Greek, or you can say stela from the Latin. It begins by saying, "I am Mesha, son of Chemosh, king of Moab."
But what if this ancient stone wasn't just a historical record? Could it have sparked real violence centuries ago? The stone that triggered bloodshed. The inscription starts off with the king's words of bragging. "I am Mesha, son of Chemoshiat, king of Moab, the Dibonite." He is not being humble. Rather, he is trying to assert dominance by presenting a royal edifice to the public to read aloud, to occupy the public space, and to proclaim a superior position. Mesha starts by explaining how much Moab suffered at the hands of Israel. Omri was the king of Israel. He oppressed Moab for many days. Chemosh was angry with his land. This sentence corresponds to the Bible. In 1 Kings 16, Omri is described as a mighty king, and he ruled over Israel, expanding the area of control. Also, 2 Kings 3:4 states, "Now Malach, king of Moab, was a shepherd and delivered against the king of Israel 100,000 lambs and the wool of 100,000 rams." Thus, the stone and the Bible are in agreement about the events occurring, although they offer opposite viewpoints on that same issue. But what if the stone isn't just recounting history? Could it be hiding a secret strategy that turned the tide of war? Rebellion written in stone. Mesha uses the words of an ancient chronicle to record this fact. "And after him his son was king and said, I have oppressed Moab, but in my day I have defeated him." Mesha does not want you to think that these words have any poetic significance, but instead he points out that these are actual quotations from the Bible. The reason he emphasizes this point is that shortly after King Ahab died, the Moabites took advantage of the power struggles in Israel and began a revolution against their oppressors, Israel. This uprising was not just a singular event in time. Mesha shows how there are many examples throughout the history of Israel when events occurred in a synchronistic manner. Mesha gives very specific details about all of the cities that fell back under the control of the Moabites, and how one city after another returned to them like an ancient tidal wave that had come back to reclaim them. Additionally, Mesha provides the following very disturbing quote from a passage he had referenced. "I took Nebo from Israel and killed all of the inhabitants, 7,000 men, boys, women, and girls, and converted them to my servants. I dedicated Nebo for destruction unto Chemosh." Chemosh as indicated by this sad assessment, symbolizes the many scars and the destruction of lives and property that are reflected in the former Second Kings. The authors have written extensively about the violence that perpetuates the realities of conflict during the ancient Near East. They show no hesitation in exposing the bloodshed, the widespread killings, and the use of slaves. The divine justification for warfare, as shown by the reference to Chemosh, was common in the ancient Near East. Chemosh was a god associated with the Moabites. Through the dedication of the title of the conquered city to Chemosh, Mesha does not simply announce a territorial acquisition, but also a violent act of sacrifice to gain the benefits of Chemosh for all future conquests. As with many biblical writings, the ceremonial destruction of the Egyptian armies was a popular motif, further demonstrating that war, while it is a method of political domination, is also a ritualized, sacred enterprise. In addition to affirming biblical historical veracity, Mesha's statement exposes the degree of reality displayed by the Hebrew Bible with respect to the realities of the ancient world and its military campaigns. Neither Mesha nor the authors of the Hebrew Scriptures attempt to romanticize the brutality associated with war. Rather, each provides a brutally honest picture of a time in which vast cities were destroyed, their inhabitants put to death, and entire cultures were changed forever, and this occurred in a very short time frame. Thus, readers in our time are invited to face the complexities of God's providence, human ambition, and the relentless cycle of conquest that defined the ancient Near Eastern milieu. But what if this stone inscription hides a secret even scholars overlook? Could it rewrite everything we know about Yahweh? The name that changes everything. The statement from the Mesha Stele, a stone inscription that records an event that took place around 840 BCE, is monumental. That a pagan deity would use the term Yahweh directly indicates the existence of this deity, Yahweh, well before many biblical scholars believe he was established or known outside of Israel. Israel's enemies acknowledged the deity's name and also understood the significance of Yahweh's sanctuary and had seized the gold vessels used in worship as a result of taking their territory by force. The Mesha Stele is evidence that surrounding nations had in-depth knowledge of Israel's worship practices, such as the location of the temple built for Yahweh and the use of the sacred gold vessels. The biblical account in 2 Kings chapter 3 supports the assertions regarding how Yahweh exercised his sovereign authority over the military campaigns of Elisha and the nations by means of prophecy. Furthermore, Mesha boasting about taking Yahweh's vessels from their place of worship demonstrates how valuable and meaningful these items were to them, and that they were held to be of such significance to them as to be viewed as something other than a piece of junk or merely a piece of local wear. The propaganda that Mesha, king of Moab, published has now provided an independent source of evidence to confirm the historical facts regarding Israel's religious history during the time of the divided kingdoms. The large volume of archaeology and textual evidence now requires us to rethink the theories that gave rise to the concept that Yahweh was once a tribal god and became a national god centuries later. But what if this ancient stele holds a hidden acknowledgement of a royal dynasty thought by some to be a myth? The shadow of the house of David. The later parts of the inscription that were also damaged contain one of the most contested reconstructions in all of archaeology, as several scholars have interpreted part of it to say, the house of David. If this is indeed accurate, it would mean that the Moabite king, Mesha, gave recognition to the Israelite royal family descended from the line of David, especially regarding its history and legitimacy. Thus, even as a political enemy, Mesha recognized David not as a mythical figure, but as a real founding monarch and leader of the royal house of Judah. This is supported and analyzed by a similar mention of this house of David found on another stone, the Tel Dan Stele, that was used by another king of an opposing kingdom, the Arameans. The existence of two opposing kingdoms with stone inscriptions referencing the same royal dynasty strengthens the argument that David was an actual historical figure who existed in ancient Israel and was not a creation of the imagination by some later historian in an attempt to provide legitimacy to Israel's monarchy. It cannot be overstated how important these two inscriptions are when studying the existence of King David. Prior to these finds, most critical scholars would have argued that King David was only a creation of someone writing a literary document hundreds of years later to justify or authenticate a new legend created about their own monarchy. The Mesha stele is dated approximately 840 BC. Mesha was king of Moab and boasted about all his good work against Israel. However, by doing so, he is essentially putting into writing that he has confirmed the existence of the Davidic dynasty. The methods of conducting archaeological research have advanced greatly since the discovery of the Mesha stele in 1868 due to the development of modern techniques such as extensive epigraphic analyses, sophisticated imaging technologies, and recent comparative linguistic studies, which have provided scholars with the ability to reconstruct damaged portions of this inscription with a higher degree of certainty. The reading of the House of David has gained support through interdisciplinary studies combining archaeology, biblical studies, and ancient Near Eastern history. Although this interpretation has not achieved universal agreement among scholars, it has garnered substantial support from interdisciplinary research across these various fields. The existence of competing kingdoms within the region during the 9th century BCE, including Israel and Judah, Moab, Aram Damascus, etc., also makes clear the political circumstances surrounding why Mesha refers to the Davidic line of Israel. Given that the region was so fragmented with various competing kingdoms, each vying for control over what was at that time a very politically complex region, it was not enough for Mesha to simply record history. Instead, by referring to the Davidic line of Israel, Mesha framed his victory over Israel's ruler, i.e., David, as particularly meaningful because he had defeated a ruler who had a long-standing and accepted basis of legitimacy and divine sanction as part of the worldwide kingdom of Israel. In addition to being supported by the discovery of other inscriptions that reference the Davidic line of Israel, the Khirbet Qeiyafa, excavations in and around the city of David, as well as the many Bulai seal impressions dating back to the Davidic period that have been discovered, point to the existence of an administrative center for the entire region of Jerusalem during David's rule. Although archaeological evidence of David as an individual is not available yet, the cumulative archaeological data strongly support the belief that David ruled a united kingdom. Disagreements over the size of David's kingdom and the veracity of biblical accounts are ongoing in the academic community, with scholars who adhere to both minimalist and maximalist positions. The Essenes of the period have raised questions about the extent of David's kingdom and whether or not biblical sources are trustworthy. On the other hand, the Mesha stele and the Tel Dan stele have allowed scholars to move from being skeptical of David's very existence to investigating what type of territory and authority he controlled.
The Mesha stele is a basalt monument that was discovered in 1868, and it tells the story. It's one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of all time, in my estimation.
While initially regarded as enemy propaganda, these two pieces of evidence now provide critical insights into the reconstruction of the history of ancient Israel and surrounding cultures. But what if this ancient stone reveals truths that challenge centuries of religious authority? Could it rewrite our understanding of God? Why this matters theologically. The modern Islamic view of God, Allah, is seen as an extension and reaffirmation of all of the Hebraic and Christian biblical traditions. Yet, while Islam resonates with the ancient Abrahamic tradition and professes to continue that tradition, it also states that the scriptures were corrupted or misinterpreted by the earlier Abrahamic followers before the time of Muhammad. The Mosaic stone was written hundreds of years earlier than the founding of Islam, over 1,300 years before. Thus, it provides evidence that prior to both the founding of Christianity and the founding of Islam, the name God of Israel was already known to specific groups of people, worshipped in a particular way, and acknowledged to have been an active part of history through the perspective of pagan cultures. Therefore, this stone is not a statement of theology, it is a record of historical memory. When the record contradicts a later narrative, it represents a threat to the authority of that narrative. The archaeological evidence illustrating the evolution of monotheistic ideas exists beyond just one artifact, illustrating the interaction between cultures and religions throughout history. It also challenges the notion that there has only been one type or point of revelation from God to man. Rather, it demonstrates that the understanding of who God is has evolved and continues to evolve over time, and that historical circumstances and cultural interactions have shaped that development. A politics of memory is clearly at play in the study of the selective retention or suppression of earlier evidence, as revealed by the study of later traditions. Throughout history, the religious movements in ascendancy have led to the suppression of archaeological evidence to suit the claims of religious doctrine. Interestingly, this happens not because the archaeological evidence is irrelevant to the religious doctrine, but because the religious doctrine is more important. This trend is not just observed in religious arenas, but in politics as well. History without intent to prove faith. What gives the stale meat its power is that it was never supposed to defend the Bible. Mesha wasn't trying to help Israel's theology down the road, he was praising himself and his God. It's that exact intention that gives his testimony so much weight. Hostile sources are the gold standard of historical credibility. When an enemy confirms your story, the burden of debate moves from belief to proof. This stone does not preach, nor does it convert. It simply remembers. Religions come and go, and the story changes, but the stone remains. The Mesha stone is the stubborn witness of the ancient world, resistant to the expectations of the modern era. The God of the Bible was not a God created in a void. Already known, already named, already worshipped, and already feared before the reinterpretation of the past by the subsequent systems of theology, this pagan monarch wanted to glorify his god Chemosh. Instead, this monarch has provided one of the most potent attestations, outside the Bible, of God discovered so far. There is almost a poetic irony here. A pagan king at war against the kingdom of Israel erects a monument to his God, and in doing so verifies the historic fact of the God against whom he fought. The stone does not shout. The stone does not argue. It simply exists. And in its presence, for those who will hear it, is a message that time could not remove. If you liked this reflection or found it thought-provoking or challenging, I encourage you to like and share this video. There remain many rocks to speak and many stories to be told.